What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So this topic I've actually been wanting to discuss for a minute now. That is going to come down to three different things. One of them is going to be live service in gaming. The next one is going to be the DLCs, and then no DLCs, or at least having the idea of a DLC coming later. Now, I really do think this is probably going to be a fairly controversial topic. I mean, we all do know like the battle passes and stuff like that's going to be on another side of it. And I do feel like part of the battle pass thing is actually going to be in part with, the live service in the games. Now, I have to admit this right now. If I had to pick one right off the bat, I'm not sure how people are going to take it, but I would actually prefer to have regular DLCs that we actually had before in time that we did see in something like Battlefield 3 and something like that, or even Battlefield 1 where we had a premium pass in those. Now, I am going to get into why I do feel this way, but I'm going to say right now that a lot of players are most likely like, well, we don't want to pay for the DLCs. Well, that's the thing, though, because if we actually look at something like a DLC pattern, which I do know one game I can name right off the bat right now that does have a similar pattern to the old Battlefield games, is going to be SnowRunner. That game actually has around a $25 bundle, guys, with 4 DLCs in it. I have discussed it in a few other videos, but I feel like it's kind of worth it. Because as of right now, I'm not really sure of another game that has a similar build to that one when it comes to an actual DLC pattern with it. That actually kind of works, if you know what I mean. But if we look at something like a live service model, now if you're wondering, this could be something like Fortnite, Apex Legends, even something like Test Drive, even something like the Crew Motorfest. Most games nowadays have it. That is probably going to come down to a simple factor that they thought it was easier to do a live service model when looking at something like Fortnite. Now, I do understand Fortnite gets a lot of hate and stuff like that, guys, but you gotta give them credit where it's due in some places. That live service model in that game really does work so dang well. I have to give them credit on it. We all do know Apex Legends is going to have it. Now, I do understand that, yes, these games are going to be, free games for that matter, but even then, we're still seeing live service and newer games that are basically coming out. I mean, heck, I actually think most of the new games nowadays are legitimately live service. Battlefield 2042, the Crew Motorfest, the Crew 2. We also saw something like Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown following the entire, live service model, having a roadmap with all the DLCs that are going to be in it. It's going to be showing the solar passes, aka battle passes in it, going to have weekly stuff coming out. So it's basically going to be fairly similar. Now, the thing about it, though, is I do feel like in certain ways these bigger companies, when looking at it, and they're probably viewing that and going, yo, look at all the success in this. Why don't we try something like this? I think this might actually work for us as well. Here's the problem with that, though. I don't actually think a live service model is going to work in most games, though. The reason for that, and the biggest also reason why I say this, is I feel like to a certain extent the developers probably can't keep up with a live service model. And I do actually believe the reason for that, though, is if you are trying to follow that, put a bunch of updates out, it is probably going to be incredibly difficult to get tons of updates out and always having new content in there. On top of that, a lot of games nowadays do tend to actually have issues with them, whether it's going to be servers, glitches, issues in the actual game itself. So guess what? That means updates are going to have to fix that stuff before you can actually get new content, which I would say having a live service model is kind of a problem. Now, I do understand to like a certain extent. Again, I don't 100% know this stuff, but apparently Fortnite can get updates easier. I don't exactly know how. Apparently someone was saying like it's going to be quote unquote a beta so they can put updates in it easier. Again, I don't really know because I do understand newer games you have to go through like Sony and Microsoft and stuff like that for the Xbox or PlayStation for the consoles themselves instead of something like on Steam or of course, PC for that matter. So I would say getting updates out on the consoles is probably a tad more difficult. But at the same time, though, if you're actually going to follow an actual live service model, constantly putting updates out, and what I mean by that, though, is do you guys actually think having a quote-unquote live service model in a game is actually going to work with having updates coming out legitimately every 3 to 4 months? Does that actually work? Now, if there is going to be enough content in there to actually carry players over the entire time, then yeah. But most of the time, doing 3 to 4 months of content in that actual service model probably doesn't actually work. I have been noticing many games kind of failing at this a bit because, well, they're not really keeping you occupied the entire time in there. You're actually going to get a few new things in there and maybe a few new events sometimes or something, but a lot of the times I feel like it's going to be 3 to 4 months. You're going to enjoy it for maybe a week or so. Now, I'm also not saying you obviously have to live on the game, like you shouldn't be playing the game 15 or 20 hours a day or something, but let's say you're actually jumping on that said game for maybe 1 or 2 hours a day, which I would say a lot of people are probably able to play that much time, at least most of the time when gaming, right? They're probably not able to jump on 10 or 11 hours a day or something like that. So if you actually jump on an hour or two a day, then there might actually be a good amount of content there. But even then, though, is there truly going to be enough to keep you occupied for 3 to 4 months until the next big update does drop? Like, does that actually work? The thing about that, though, is if we do take a look at that, we're then going to see something like a roadmap, right? Almost every single game that comes out nowadays has a roadmap or something they promised that it is most likely going to have as time does go on. The thing is, though, a lot of players are like, yo, this roadmap looks pretty dope, bro. I can't wait for this stuff to come out. But what if the release of that game isn't that great, or it's not actually reaching the said company's expectations? Is that roadmap truly going to happen? Apparently, back on Concord, that game also had a roadmap, and what happened to that game? Am I right? We can also look at something like Solar Crown at the moment that does indeed have a pretty dope looking roadmap. We're going to be getting a DLC and all that coming out for it. That's an entire map area. Apparently getting casinos and all that later on, possible houses next year. And the funny part is I have made a few videos going over like how games are rushed out now, and also how we pretty much have been seeing a lot more broken games nowadays. And it really has been a tad concerning. Like, I feel like every game that does end up coming out nowadays tends to have a bunch of promises or like, yo, we're going to update this game and get it to what it truly should be. Isn't that kind of backwards, bro? Like, shouldn't the game actually come out as what it could probably be instead of making it into something it can be over time? And we all do know the player bases and all that are probably going to drop off, or sometimes they can stay, all probably going to come down to what the game actually is, or the entire following base of that said game, or whatever it actually is, like the series and stuff like that, probably makes a difference on if that game will end up surviving. Now, the reason why I also wanted to talk about this, though, is I did mention in the beginning of the video that, well, I would actually prefer a DLC model. The reason why, guys, I do understand that most of the time, even back then when we had like the premium pass for Battlefield, I do understand that even then it was probably planned out before the game even came out. Now, I'm not saying right now they actually planned DLCs around the entire game and cut all that content out, when that stuff probably should have been in the actual game. We have been seeing that popping up. I think Most Wanted 2012 had something like that in there, where they actually had cars that were cut from it that were supposed to be in the game itself. Apparently, Destiny has been there with certain things. I'm sure other games probably had that stuff planned, and they're like, yo, you know what, bro? Let's put this in a DLC and charge it later on. That is unfortunately probably going to be a whole nother issue, but I can also see that definitely being a thing. Now, the reason for that is probably going to come down to, like, we could put all this stuff in the game and release it, and then maybe do a DLC later if people actually want it. Funny part is, guys, there's a few games we can actually name right now that did end up doing that. Bloodborne, I also do understand, had the Old Hunters DLC, which, by the way, one of the best DLCs I have legitimately ever played in my entire life. I loved it. And I would say right now, I've also heard rumors that that DLC wasn't completely planned from like the beginning of the game. This is also something from like Elden Ring as well. Like, the DLC came out 2 years later, bro. Imagine a game coming out with so much stuff to do and content in there that they actually can work on a DLC for a year and a half and then release it. And the funny part is that's probably the way most games should actually be, though. Like, there should be so much content in the game itself that if they were like, you know what, bro, let's make an actual DLC for it in the future, that way it's going to be even better. We even saw this with Wukong, man. It's getting a DLC in January or February, I think it is. And that game was legit a dime piece when it came out, and still is. I feel like if a lot more games actually had the proper development, a lot more time put into them, then yes, I feel like they would release even better in a better state, more content, more stuff to do, no cut stuff into DLCs for that matter, and then boom, I feel like a lot more games would be even better. Then if they actually wanted to add a DLC into it, then yeah, everyone's like, yo, we need a DLC in this game. They're like, okay, we'll do it, like Elden Ring or again Wukong. People actually wanted it. That would probably be a good way to do it. And the funny part is, I'm actually thinking about this now. I'm going, wait, live service or DLC? Like, you probably have to pick one because, most new games nowadays are probably going to have one of two of those. And most likely it's going to be one of those, if you know what I mean. Yeah, and you know what? Wait a second. You know what's funny is the more I actually talk in this video, the more I think about this a bit more. Anybody else probably want to go back 12 or so years where games didn't actually really have DLCs in them? maybe that's probably the best way. Just get a game that's actually complete in the first place, and then again, if they actually want to add DLCs to it, they end up doing it. I do feel like a lot of games nowadays are probably going to almost be half-baked in a sense, and again, I do understand this entire topic is probably going to be a bit controversial, but I have to speak my mind on this, man, because we have been seeing this in so many games nowadays. And if people are actually spending $100 on a game, don't you actually think they deserve the game to be good? I mean, that game should not be going on sale in 3 weeks to a month after it comes out, bro. Like, legit, I have to say that. I do admit right now I did end up spending 120 bucks on the Crew Motorfest. Legit, 3 weeks after it came out, it was like 50% off. That honestly did not feel that great. I do know a lot of players spent $90 on Solar Crown. That was obviously not going to be worth $90 to play the game early when it did not even work for a couple of weeks for most players. So I would say that's kind of an issue. Like, if you're actually going to be spending all this money on games, they should probably work. Am I right? Who would have thought the game should actually work if you spend money on it? Weird. Ain't that weird? The more I actually think about this, though, it probably is going to be along the lines of live service DLCs or no DLCs. If I had to guess right now, everybody is probably going to take the third option, including myself. Now, I do understand nowadays that, well, that is probably not going to happen, unless it's probably going to be from a specific company, like From Software, for example, or the Wukong developers. I feel like if the game's actually going to be great on release, everybody's like, yo, you guys are going to do a DLC, right? And they were probably like, well, we weren't really thinking about it, but you know what? Why not? We'll do a DLC. And the funniest part is if the game actually comes out fully complete instead of having a roadmap to it, which some of that stuff again might actually be promises, it might not really get into the game. Players are actually going to buy that DLC with open arms, man. And I actually did something very similar with the Shadows of the Erdtree DLC for Elden Ring. I looked at it and I was like, no, bro, I'm getting this. I'm pre-ordering this now. I do know for a fact it's going to be absolutely insane. Look how good the base game is itself. We actually do know the DLC is probably going to follow it, which in return, if you actually have a great base game to it instead of wrapping that entire game around something like a live service and promising updates for it forever, or at least years down the road, maybe actually having a good game design there and then actually adding something afterwards might actually be a lot better for the entire fan base. And I feel like a lot of players might look at that model and go, yo, I kind of like the sound of that. How about we actually get completed games, and then why don't you all think about DLCs after if the game does great, or if you actually have, a good player base, the game is going to be good for that matter when it comes out. Tons of content, tons of things to do. Instead of the game being actually half-baked or something where all the stuff is promised, or it is then going to be broken up into DLCs because if they didn't do it, then I feel like they probably had to try to make money after the game did end up coming out. We all do know right now the entire live service thing really is going to be a plague, man. I had to say it. I do understand, like, yes, it does work. Sure, having a battle pass in there might be kind of cool to some people, but when I'm looking at some of the stores and games now, we're seeing $50, $60 skins, which, by the way, is almost the price of a full game for a single skin bundle. Am I the only one that thinks that sounds a bit insane, bro? Seeing a $60 skin bundle in a game with a couple of weapon skins makes no sense to me. I don't understand it. And I do understand if players actually want to buy that stuff, then sure, yeah, go for it. But like, bro, that's so weird because other games are like, yo, if they could do $30 or $40 skin bundles or these weird like cosmetic bundles, why don't we do the exact same thing? And then boom, you might actually start seeing some weird car stuff in there, whether it's going to be special livery bundles or some like special packs on the car, a special body kit or something you have to pay money for. Like that stuff could happen if the other games are being good and actually doing that and players are buying it. I kind of feel like that's going to be a problem. And then looking at that though, we're actually going to get a full DLC or four of them for that matter on SnowRunner for legitimately $25. So you're telling me right now I get four full DLCs, probably 12 to 15 new vehicles, new maps, all kinds of new things to do for 25 bucks, or I could spend $50 on a single skin pack. What? Like, bro, it just doesn't, math is not math in there, man. It really does not make any sense to me how that actually is going to be a thing. And I feel like a lot of games are probably doing it now because most games are focusing on microtransactions, figuring they can actually get more money out of the game and actually charge players for things that probably should have been in there on a progression standpoint. Let's go take a look right now at Wukong, guys, and Elden Ring, or even Bloodborne. I can probably keep going here, Dark Souls and stuff like that. Go find me some cosmetic microtransactions in those games. Oh, wait. won't have to wait very long because there is nothing. You actually can go earn everything. It's all in there. Players actually play those games and go, yo, one reason why I'm going to buy this DLC and one reason why I love this company, I will always buy games from them is, well, they're not charging me $40 for a skin or a weapon pack in there where I can actually go earn this stuff and it's not going to be charged. And speaking of that though, I feel like that's probably the legit biggest issue in gaming right now, man, is probably going to be the greed. I might even touch on this in a future video. I really do enjoy going over these topics and actually giving my honest thoughts on them, and of course seeing what everybody else thinks, especially in the gaming world at the moment. We can all agree right now a lot of games coming out, guys. I mean, honestly, it's just sad, man. Like, it really is. A lot of games I feel like are focusing on the greedy part of it, going after and trying to make money from everybody, instead of making a game players actually like. You have to really want to make a game players like, and then guess what? They might actually buy it. Look at Elden Ring, look at Wukong, man. Like, these games are actual things. Even Baldur's Gate 3, like, if you want a good game, you probably have to make a good game instead of actually making a half-baked game and then charging full price for it, then adding microtransactions, upcoming live service models with new microtransactions that are part of it. You're going to throw in a battle pass in there and promises that a lot of that stuff might not even end up happening, or the things you actually get in the said game is not even what you really do want. And on top of not being what you want, it might even end up being along the lines of, yo, this DLC is not that good, man, or like, this was supposed to be the quote-unquote big update. I actually have noticed that when games do tend to have an actual DLC to them, they actually do have a lot of content in them, at least from what I have noticed. When it does come to like the live service model though, the set updates they are adding tend to not be all that great, at least I have noticed it. It's also kind of being a trend we have seen in the recent games that have come out. If they are following that live service model, it doesn't always work. And also, I'm not really talking about Grand Theft Auto in this because that's an entirely different conversation. Do let me know what you guys think about this in the comments below. Is it going to be the live service model DLCs or no DLC? If I honestly had to pick, I'd probably pick the no DLC route and then end up following the route of something like Elden Ring or Wukong, to where they actually end up adding a DLC later on because everybody does want it. I really do feel like that's probably going to be the best way to really get these games on the correct track. Because as of right now, man, I really do not like the way modern gaming is going. It's honestly pretty sad to see where a lot of these games are turning the updates in them, and a lot of the stuff and all the overall passion just doesn't seem to be there.